Hello, I'm Wendy. Today I'm painting a watercolour landscape with hawthorne and heather, and it's a painting demonstration. This is a photograph of mine and the one I'll be working from today. It's taken on Dartmoor and it was the season for hawthorn berries and heather. So it was about hawthorn berries and heather, but I think it was more about the fence. It might seem a little bit odd, but I just love the shape of the fence and the contrast of the fence being very light against the darker background with all these other lovely things going on, like the colour of the heather, the berries on the hawthorn bush. I wanted to capture something of the essence of the scene rather than painting it literally. So there's certain things that I did pick out, as you'll see as we're going along. I didn't put a lot of the distance detail in there. So it was, although I'm calling it a landscape, it is more of a study really of the bush and the fence and some of that lovely pink that was on the moor at that time. This video is a demonstration painting and not a tutorial, so I will be skipping past some of the stages. I'll basically be showing you how I build up a painting like this from a photograph. So I do hope that you enjoy it and that you will learn something and maybe some ideas that you could put into your own paintings. I think quite a lot of us do like to go out and capture scenes with our sketchbook and our camera, and we come home and we want to reproduce them because we love them so much, but it's not that easy, is it? It is quite difficult, and over the years I've sort of worked out for myself a process of how to do that. So as I say, I hope some of it will be of use to you in your own paintings. I started off with quite a loose sketch of the bush, as you can see, with the wall on the left hand side, and the heather I was going to just put over there on the right hand side as it was in the photograph. I didn't do a lot of masking out, but I did want to maintain the lightness of the fence, since that was the thing that I was particularly interested in, and particularly painting on this scale as well. It would be difficult to paint around those areas, so I've masked them out. If you're unsure about the use of masking fluid, then I have very recently made a video showing you how I use masking fluid, the brand that I use, and how I apply it. So I will give you a link to that video in the description box below. But I do use the PBO masking fluid, and I use a good brush, and I wash the brush out in soapy water every 20 or 30 seconds or so, just to protect it. And at the end of the session, then I'll wash it out in warm soapy water as well. Popped a bit of masking fluid on the tops of the heather. I didn't really want to lose the lightness there, and I wanted it to contrast against the bush behind in a similar way to the fence. Switching brushes, I used a rigger here to apply some masking fluid, trying to put it on really, really lightly for the wire that was hanging between the fence posts. It's really tricky doing this, and I think you really do need to use a good brush, but as long as you protect it and just keep one of your older brushes or a less expensive rigger for doing it and wash it out and protect it, then it's going to last a long time and it works really well. You can use other things, you can use colour shapers, and there are some specially branded products that you can get that have a very fine tip, so it's worth looking around if you're struggling a little bit with the masking fluid to see what there is out there that you can buy to help. I started off the painting by putting on a very light sky, and then I put on the distant hills with a light green. This wasn't going to be the final colour of the hills, but when I'm building up a picture I do like to get rid of the white, and I like to put on a light wash of a colour that I see in the distance there, which I will go over at a later stage. And again here I'm doing a similar thing with the bush, putting on the first layers of paint. In this case I'm putting on, it looked like a cooler green, but that will be changed later on in the painting. And I'm putting on some red just to suggest the berries on there. Again, I will be enhancing the red colour in there later on in the painting, but I like to just do everything quite muted to start with and very transparent, and then I've no particular idea of what I'm going to do in my head, but I will use these first marks that I've put down to sort of direct me, if you like, later on in the painting. Again here I got rid of some of the white, well, most of the white in the foreground, except for the areas where some of the pink was going to be, and I left some areas for the stones. And here I'm putting on the pink where the heather's going to go. You can so easily lose these areas when you're painting watercolour. You're never going to get them back, because unless you use an opaque paint, you can't paint light over dark. So I find it a good idea, if I've got a mass of flowers, is to put that colour on over a big area. You can cover it up with other things, but then you've got a chance then that you're going to retain the light transparent colour that you wanted. And here again I'm just putting on one or two sort of greens in the background that I saw, lighter versions of them. So the next little bit I've speeded up ×2. It's just building up the foliage from those lighter washes. I'm trying to change the greens as I go along and change the brush strokes if I can, making them sort of less dense towards the outside of the bush, and popping in a little bit more of the red. So you can see I'm progressively darkening the tones on the bush. This is how I tend to like to build up the bush. I can tell you a little bit about the paper while I'm doing this. It's Saunders Waterford, which I do like to use. It's one of my favourite papers. Saunders Waterford, £140 knot surface. And I'm working on a block this time. It's quite a large block, so I'm just turned it round and using half of it. Saunders Waterford is a lovely paper and it's my paper of choice, but I also use Bockingford a lot. Bockingford, £140, which is a less expensive paper and works really well, especially when you're starting out in watercolour. Bockingford will serve you really well. And the colours themselves, again, I tend to stick to the Winsor and Newton Cotman range. Occasionally I have to buy the artist quality, but purely because I want a particular colour that doesn't come in the Cotman. So I think you'll find those paints will work very well. When I'm building up a painting like this, I don't tend to finish areas. I didn't finish the bush. I left it about 3/4 finished, because what I feel is I can't judge the tones properly and the detail with something in isolation, like the bush in this case. So I'll get to a certain stage with it, and then I'll move to a different part of the picture. In this case I'm doing a little bit more on the foreground. I'm seeing what sort of colours are there and putting them in. But I think you'll find that if you work this way, you'll find your painting easier, because I think what happens sometimes is you get to a particular area and you labour it, you try and get it perfect, if you like, and you overwork it to the detriment of the rest of the picture. And quite often, if you think you're leaving things half finished or 3/4 finished, then when you've worked more around your picture, you'll find that really it's done. And here I've added a little bit more of the pink and also some of the sort of gold colours that I was seeing in the foreground as well. Quite a lot of these colours will be covered up, but that doesn't matter. It will give more interest in the foreground, and these colours will hopefully shine through a little bit in places. I'm showing you here how I painted the distant hill. I think people do have trouble getting these darks put in, and I think it's quite important when you're working like this to get them put in one go, Otherwise, you're going to find that everything gets very overworked. I had to get a really dark purple, particularly behind the fence, because that's what I was interested in this picture. It was the focal point, it was my thing that drew me towards the scene, these contrasts, so I did have to get it very dark. I used light red with ultramarine mainly, working wet into wet and getting the darks put in one go. I'm pretty certain I didn't re-darken that area, and if I did, it would only be a tiny little bit. So it's mixing up those darks, which I know can be a problem, particularly when you're first starting out in watercolour. But make sure that you mix plenty on your palette so you can keep going back to the wash and making those darks as dark as you can. And at this stage now, I had a better idea of the final darks in the hawthorn bush. And again, I'm using very dark green in places, constantly looking at the reference to see where the darks were and judging them against the background. I'm using, for the darkest darks, it's going to be a base of Prussian with burnt sienna and a yellow. My other greens are mixed from a base of cobalt blue with burnt sienna and a yellow, and I do use sap green to brighten up the greens as well. I speeded the next little bit up again because it does get quite repetitive. There were quite a lot of very small branches and twigs coming out from the bush, and so I made a start here using about a number 2 rigger brush and dotting around a little bit because the bush was quite untidy. I think sometimes we tend to neaten up our landscapes too much. And also at this stage I reinforced some of the berries. I did this gradually because I didn't want it to look too artificial, too much like a holly tree, if you like. So I was building up the reds gradually as I was painting the picture. Going back to the foreground now, I started reinforcing some of those very light pinks that I put on earlier on. And then I put in some of the greens that were the green leaves of the heather. Now at this stage it is very easy to cover up too much of the pink. I could have left a little bit more, I thought, when I'd finished the painting, but generally I was pretty happy with the amount that I left. And so I'm doing fairly random marks. This is just the way that I work. Your style will be different from mine, and you might want to be more considered in this area, but I tend to keep an eye on my reference clearly all the time and get ideas from it, but my marks tend to be quite random in some ways, quite loose, and I gradually build up the greens tonally, and at the end of this process that I'm doing, then I have a look at it and then I make some adjustments to sort of tighten it up, as you'll see. And sharpening up some of the pink, you just want to do it in places so you get different tones. I use mauve, Cotman mauve for the heather, by the way. I tried looking at a lot of other pinks, but I think mauve is a nice colour for this, and you can adjust it with other pinks and with the blue if you wanted. Now you can see here I've got to the stage where I put a mount around it to try and finalise the final composition. I did actually, as you can see here, which is why I showed you this bit, I did in fact darken again behind that fence. It was greener than the purple, and I just put a little bit more of the green in and balanced it on the other side, but it wasn't an awful lot more. I did try to get those real darks in there earlier on in the picture. The next stage of the painting I just tightened up a little bit by adding some shadows underneath the rocks on the left hand side there, and also just a few more twigs and berries. The right hand side of the heather there needed some work. All those random marks that I'd put in looked particularly random and the same tone to me and not very interesting. And what I like to do at this stage is to go back into this area with a nice brush, a nice pointed brush, and a very dark colour. In this case it would be the green, and to, again, they're fairly random marks, but this time they're a little bit more considered, and I'm changing the tone of that area in the front to make it more interesting. I'm putting some of the dark strokes against the light strokes, and as I said, generally making it more interesting. If you put some of these dark areas and more different marks to what you've got before there, then it adds interest and it adds tone without being too considered about what you're painting. And I think it works quite well. Sometimes it works better than others, but there we are, that's painting for you. Now all I've done here is rubbed off the masking fluid, and as usual you do get some rather odd marks in places and maybe little bits that you don't want. This turned out not too bad really. All I needed to do was to get some of that background colour and just get rid of a few little marks that I didn't like. But generally that masking fluid went on quite well. I was quite pleased. It's got the contrast there of the fence against the background quite nicely. Here I'm using a little bit of opaque white to just put a few more little bits of the wire in there, and just to tidy it up a tiny little bit. I'm using, as I said, I'm using an opaque white ink, and there's a link to that in the description box below. But you could use a white gouache or a white acrylic if you wanted, with a tiny little brush, just to make one or two minor adjustments. So finally, very carefully, so I didn't make them too dark, I added a touch of raw sienna to the fence posts, just to knock back the absolute whiteness of the paper. And looking at the photograph, the actual wire that was going between the fence posts was very light blue, so I did the same on that with it's hardly noticeable. So this was my final painting, and I hope you enjoyed watching the video and learning something about my process of building up paintings. And I hope that you can apply some of the techniques and ideas to your own paintings. If you don't want to miss anything in the future, then do subscribe to my channel. I have a Facebook group where you can post paintings, pictures of your own work, so there is a link in the description box, and it's always nice to see other people's work. It's work that is related to the videos on this channel, but not necessarily copies of them. So do share your work with us. Bye for now, and happy painting as always.